In your court, what matters more, the rights of individuals or your political ideology?
I apply the law to the facts.
I asked a question, which matters more?
Well, my political ideology doesn't matter at all.
Okay, so I don't believe you. And I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology.
What's up, family? Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out. We're going to break this down, look at the different perspectives, and then I'll give my thoughts. Now, you already know the deal. When you see a hearing where a senator is reading a judge's own words back to her, she's sitting there trying to talk around it, and that's when you know something's off. But here's where it gets worse. You got a Democrat chair who decides to step in and block the follow-up question, and that's when Ted Cruz, who you see on the screen right now, and John Kennedy, my boy, went off. So let me set the scene for you. This is a Senate Judicial Committee hearing. Judge Netborn is a nominee, and she's being questioned about a case she handled. And the case is not some small thing. The case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. And if you think about that for a second, a grown man, a 9-year-old child, he pleaded guilty to that. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. He pled guilty to that too. And then after serving time, he gets out, violates parole, gets sent back, gets out again, and gets convicted of disturbing child sexual abuse material. So this is a serial repeat child predator. Now, here's where the question comes in. This individual, 6'2", biologically a male, decides he wants to be housed in a women's prison. And Judge Netborn's ruling said yes. She ordered the Bureau of Prisons to transfer this man into a women's facility. And when Cruz asked her about it, things got interesting real fast. All right. Now, to be fair, the judge has a right to explain her reasoning. She's sitting there. She's under oath. She's answering questions. That's the process. That's how it's supposed to work. You ask questions, the witness answers, you follow up. The public gets to see what's really going on. But here's where it doesn't add up. Cruz starts reading from her own order, and he's quoting her own words back to her. And the judge's testimony in this hearing directly contradicted what she had written in her report. She said one thing on paper, and then she said something different sitting in that chair. Now think about that. This is a judge, someone whose job is built on precision, on the law, on getting the facts straight. And she's sitting there saying the Bureau of Prisons didn't raise concerns about violence. But her own report says the exact opposite. Her own report says, and I quote, the Bureau of Prisons claim a penological interest in protecting female prisoners from violence and trauma. This interest is legitimate. She wrote that. She wrote that to the Bureau of Prisons, was worried about women getting hurt, right? And then she turned around in the hearing and acted like the Bureau of Prisons never said anything about violence. So Cruz asks her, why does your testimony contradict your own report? And before she can answer, the Democrat chair steps in and shuts it down, moves on, cuts the line of questioning off, and that's when John Kennedy stands up and says, are you going to let her answer that question? You don't want her to answer that question very much. And he calls it what it is. He says it's a cover-up. And I'm sitting there watching this thinking he's not wrong. Because when you block someone from answering a direct contradiction, what are you hiding? You're not protecting the process. You're protecting the witness from having to explain something she can't explain.
This case involves a male defendant who raped a 9-year-old boy. Was he guilty of that?
Yes, the petitioner pled guilty to that.
Okay, so he raped a 9-year-old boy. He also raped a 17-year-old girl. Was he guilty of that?
He pled guilty. The petitioner pled guilty to that crime as well.
So was he guilty?
I hope so, because she pled guilty to it.
He was a he when he did this.
That's correct.
And also criminal deviant conduct, which the record doesn't disclose what that was exactly. Then, after serving in prison, Mr. McLean was released for parole, but then violated the terms of parole by having internet and was sent back to prison. 1 year after being released again, he was convicted of having child pornography. Is that correct?
I'm unclear on exactly the time frame that you're at, but the petitioner was convicted of distributing child pornography.
Child pornography that was images of adults violently raping children.
Abhorrent conduct.
Okay,
for which there are real victims.
And this individual, 6'2", biologically a man. A minute ago, you said that when this man decided that he was a she, you said this individual was, quote, I wrote it down, sober and entirely a female. That phrase struck me as remarkable. Did this individual have male genitalia?
I think what I said, or at least what
that is a verbatim quote, entirely a female.
Sorry, what I meant to say was hormonally a female.
Okay, but that's not entirely. Did this individual have male genitalia?
Yes.
So you took a 6'2" serial rapist, serial child rapist with male genitalia, and he said, you know, I'd like to be in a women's prison. And your answer was, that sounds great to me. Let me ask you something. The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Is that a question you're
yes,
asking me?
The other women in that prison, do they have any rights?
Of course.
Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial rapist put in as their cellmate?
Senator Cruz, I considered the facts presented to me, and I reached a decision
I asked you a
based on what
question.
the law
I asked
is.
you a question.
She considered the facts, but if you consider the facts, then you would know that she had genital parts, right? So biologically, he was a male, and ended up, becoming a woman, as some individuals would say, like a transformer or trans, right? And mind you, this was May 22, 2024. 2 years later, which is currently August 2026, we have this still going on. So not only was there concerns with trans being in women jail facilities or prisons, and the Bureau of Prisons had concerns, as you see in this case. But fast forward to the current example now, we also have it where we're trying to protect young women in women's locker rooms when it comes to sports. As you see with the Indiana Fever, and to be more specific, Sophia Cunningham, who is the guard of the Indiana Fever, who spoke up and said, look, I respect the trans community, but also the WNBA is a women's national basketball league where women compete against each other, woman to woman biologically, to to be the top talent in the world, competing against each other equally with fair competition amongst each other, in which they meet biologically, being woman versus woman at the highest elite performance when it comes to basketball. So you see how 2 years ago, but this is still playing out 2 years before this played out, and 2 years currently. We're still having the same battle, in which a lot of people would say the far left represents, and how far left, and let alone this judge being a danger to communities and society based on her judgment and discernment, because she's having wordplay and word salad, and she's basically saying she's objecting or absolving herself from taking accountability for the judgment that she made. But you peep how she nitpicks and only points out the specifics to the things that she wants to justify for the judgment that she made. So you don't know all the details. You only know what's presented to you, but you know that this male who ended up being trans had male genital biologically to begin with, and the bureaus of prisons raised a concern within you transferring this biological male to a female facility, a jail prison facility, that are made up of biologically women who were born biologically a woman, and it was a concern by the prisons, and you didn't care. So now when he lays it out in full context with the truth and what she said in her own words, she's trying to attack, dodge, and deflect by saying, oh, I only know what's presented to me. And also, yes, he had genitals, or he had male genital, like genitals. So where are we going with this point? What's your point? Because you can't even explain at that point. You shot yourself in the foot. Because the fact is, you knew that it was male genitals from the beginning with, but now all of a sudden, oh, the facts presented to you? But you factually have said something. If you didn't know the facts entirely, then you can't speak to it. But since you knew factually from the beginning what you were dealing with, and justifiably makes sense why the Bureau of Prisons had a concern raised to you as a judge.
Question. Do they have a right not to have a 6'2" man who is a serial rapist put in as their cellmate? Do those women have a right to that?
Every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space.
But you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to give some quotes from your order because Senator Kennedy is right. This is not a judge's order. This is a political activist. By the way, the beginning of your order says, at birth, people are typically assigned a gender. I got to say that would astonish a lot of Americans. A lot of Americans think you go to the hospital, a baby is born, and congratulations, you have a little boy, a little girl. The assigned a gender, I know you went to Brown, but it sounds like it's in a college faculty lounge with no bearing on reality. The Bureau of Prison argued what I'm saying right now, that if you put this person in a female prison, there will be a risk of sexual assault to the women. And you know what you did? You said you didn't care about the women. I'm going to quote what you wrote. You wrote, quote, "The Bureau of Prisons claim penological interest in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. This interest is legitimate," that's kind of you to say, "but there are no signs that petitioner is at risk of reoffending. The record is devoid of evidence of incidents of violence or assault during petitioner's incarceration when she was the perpetrator, only the victim. A theoretical risk of sexual assault by the prisoner without more cannot support the BOP's position. No evidence, theoretical." Have you dealt, in what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at a risk of reoffending?
Senator, as I do in every case.
I know you've been told to repeat the line, "I follow the law." I asked a question. In what universe is someone who is a serial repeat child rapist not at risk of reoffending?
Sir, I looked at the facts that were before me in this case. All of the evidence, including the statements of every warden who had supervised this petitioner.
You also wrote, "The BOP also posits that permitting petitioner to live among women will be traumatizing and possibly dangerous to them. This concern is overblown." I have to say, if I were the father of one of those women, and you decided that my daughter's cellmate was going to be a 6'2" man who over and over and over again committed violent sexual assault, I would say the entire justice system is absurd, and it is clear on your record your political ideology matters a heck of a lot more than the rights of those women that you endangered. I think you're a radical, and I think you have no business being a judge.
Makes sense, right? Because when ideology trumps facts and the biological science and the biological makeup of a human being and which you were born and stated in the gender in which you were born. But the simple fact is it becomes political because basically you are pandering to a certain community and also whoever politically in which you are being appointed as a judge in that state or whatever. It depends on who the strings are being pulled behind you to keep you in that position. Also worrying about political power and keeping you in your position to basically prop you up for your success than actually caring about upholding public safety.
Judge Netburn, there was an opportunity during your exchange with Senator Cruz that you were attempting to offer a response relative to the conditions under which this petitioner was unsafe in the facilities in which she was being held. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to finish that response.
So the facts that were presented to me and what I relied on to make my decision were that the petitioner had engaged in no violence, no physical violence, no acts of sexual violence whatsoever while in custody. All three wardens who supervised the petitioner requested that she be transferred to a women's facility because of her serious medical needs. In addition, the Bureau of Prisons' longtime medical provider testified at a 2-day hearing in my courtroom and recommended that the petitioner be transferred because of her serious medical needs. And the last thing I'll say is that
He's like speaking in circles, like a parrot, right? Because transferred to a female facility because of medical needs, but still doesn't absolve that biologically it's a male. So now you have the collision of human rights, or rights, right? Because female rights is being overridden because the simple fact is you have a biological male that end up becoming trans of choice and how they want to be. You be who you want to be, but now it's stepping over the human rights of biological females in a jail facility. If you want to make things more common, then just have a trans jail facility for
Transgender
common ground.
Executive Council, which is the body that makes decisions on behalf of transgender transfer requests within the Bureau of Prisons, never said that the petitioner could not be transferred, and never, ever said that she couldn't be transferred because of any risk of violence. What the Transgender Executive Council repeatedly said in denying the request was simply that she needed to maintain her hormone levels. That was the repeated justification for the denial of transfer. But the petitioner had reached full female hormone levels before even being incarcerated. At the time, the district judge in Indiana who sentenced the petitioner requested that she be placed in a women's facility. Her hormones were entirely female at that point, and so the decision by the Transgender Executive Council to deny the transfer request based on this idea that it was only because her hormones needed to be consistent and stabilized, I found was a pretext, but they never once said she cannot be transferred because of violence. It was always based on this idea that her hormones had to be.
Thank you, Judge Netburn. Senator
Judge
Padilla.
Netburn, that's
Senator
directly
Padilla.
contrary to what your
Senator,
report
you all
says.
have
That is
had
direct-
no.
We're gonna follow up.
We're going to
No,
there
you're gonna
is
follow up,
no
and that's how it
follow-up.
works.
There is not.
That is
There
exactly
is-
how it works.
Look,
If
we're
you
gonna be
follow
allowed
up,
to
you didn't get
ask
extra time,
questions?
and she just directly contradicted her own report. I'm just going to read her own words
Now, this isn't
because
fair,
it's
Madam
exactly
Chair.
the opposite of what she said. Your own
Chair.
report.
Senators,
says, quote,
I gave both of you more time
You-
to finish your
you
line
allowed
of
the witness to
questioning.
testify
I
and
allowed the
introduce
witness
facts.
to
You jumped in
finish
and took
her.
another round.
I allowed
You
the
took
witness
another
to
round.
finish
You
her
opened the door.
response.
You
I
opened the
allowed
door
the
to this.
witness to finish
You're
her
abusing
response.
your status
That is,
chair.
Okay, I understand that,
That
you're
is not-
scared of the
You are
facts.
abusing
I
your
have-
status
Chair.
as chair.
Senator
Madam Chair,
Padilla?
You
Madam
can't
Chair,
just open
Thank you,
up
Madam Chair.
testimony and then
she
not
has an
give us a
obligation to
chance
explain
cross-examine.
why she directly contradicted what she wrote in her report. She says in her report, the Bureau of Prisons' claimed penological interest is in protecting female prisoners from sexual violence and trauma. She just told you the Bureau of Prisons didn't say there was a concern about sexual violence and trauma. Those are directly contradictory, and why are you contradicting what you wrote in your report?
And what are you
Madam
trying to
Chair, I
hide,
believe
Madam
I have
Chair?
the floor.
No, wait, point of
I
order.
believe
Senator
I
Padilla.
have the
Senator
floor.
Padilla.
Are you going to let her answer that question?
Senator
or you
Padilla.
don't want her to answer that question?
Senator
You're
Padilla.
afraid?
This
Very
is
much,
a
Madam
cover-up,
Chair.
Madam
Senator
Chair.
Are you
Padilla.
afraid of the answer to
This
that?
is
Colleague.
no
Cover-up.
Are
Senator
you afraid
Padilla.
of the answer to that question?
Senator
Colleagues,
Padilla.
So yes,
My
you are
time.
afraid of the answer to that question.
Senator Padilla.
Please hold
Clearly,
my
you're
time.
afraid of the answer to that question.
This is
Thank you.
absurd.
Two of the nominees before us, appreciate your patience and your dignity.
So there you have it, right? And when you get into what Cruz actually laid out in this hearing, because this is the part that should make everybody pay attention, he asked the judge directly, in your court, what matters more, the rights of individuals or your political ideology? And she said, I apply the law to the facts. And he said, I asked a question, which matters more? She said, my political ideology doesn't matter at all. And Cruz looked at her and said, I don't believe you, and I think this case demonstrates that you are willing to subjugate the rights of individuals to satisfy your political ideology. And now that's a strong accusation, but then he backed it up. He walked through the case step by step. He read from her own order where she said the Bureau of Prisons' concern about protecting female prisoners from violence was, quote, overblown, and she called it a theoretical risk. Theoretical. A 6'2" man biologically who raped a 9-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl who has a history of child sexual abuse material being placed in a woman's prison, and she called the risk of sexual assault theoretical. Cruz asked her, do the other women in that prison have any rights? Do they have the right not to have a 6'2" man who is a repeat serial child predator put in as their cellmate? And she wouldn't answer the question directly. She said every person who's incarcerated has the right to be safe in their space. General answer. But as you've seen, Cruz didn't let her off the hook because he said, but you didn't think so. You didn't think so. And in fact, I'm going to get some quotes from your order because Senator Kennedy is right that this is not a judge's order. This is a political activist. And then he read where she wrote about how babies are typically assigned a gender. And he said, I know you went to Brown, but it sounds like in a college faculty lounge with no bearing, no reality. And honestly, when you hear this full exchange, right, it's hard to argue with him. Now, here's the thing. The judge eventually got a chance to explain herself, as you saw, and after the chair and gave her a platform to speak. And what did she say? She said the petitioner had engaged in no violence while in custody. She said all three wardens who supervised the petitioner requested that she be transferred to a women's facility because of serious medical needs. She said the transgender executive council never cited violence as a reason for denying the transfer. But here's the problem with that. Her own report says the Bureau of Prisons raised concerns about violence and trauma to female prisoners. It's right there in black and white, and she called those concerns legitimate. But then she said they were overblown and theoretical. So which is it? You can't say the Bureau of Prisons never raised concerns about violence when you wrote in your own order that the Bureau of Prisons claimed an interest in protecting female prisoners from violence and trauma. Those are your literal words, literally. And that's why Cruz was pressing her. That's why Kennedy got up there and said what he said. Because when the written record contradicts the spoken testimony, somebody needs to explain that. And when the chair cuts off that explanation, people are going to ask why. And it makes you wonder because the individuals who is cutting off the explanation and not allowing the judge to explain herself is because there's no other way to put it, but from the way you take from that action is because they support it. You feel as though an individual should no longer have to speak about their contradictions. That's why the chair cuts off the explanation. And this is the far left currently today, right? Only rules to those they can pander to continue to make sure that they are basically guaranteed a vote. This is about power, but pandering to certain groups and basically stepping over other individual rights, even if that means them staying in power for self-interest. It's no different with illegals voting on the voter rolls when they shouldn't be in the first place, for the simple fact that most of Americans, if you allow them to vote and they are legal and verified, then the vote will speak to itself. But don't undermine, or should say discredit the vote of those who are here legally and American citizens' voice because you don't like what they're saying. So the way to undermine that is to get illegals to have a much bigger pool that you can pander to stay in power in the name of entitlement. And then what happens is when that entitlement goes unchecked, the monster you create eventually eats you. And what happens is the Democratic Party and the far left, as they're doing right now, and eating themselves because they don't stand for nothing. They only stand for ideology, and ideology can be remixed based on feeling, and feeling is only basically what you want to hear and what I want. So you no longer serve the people who voted you in, only people who basically tell you what you want to hear to keep you in power for your own self-interest, let alone political power, and then it becomes party over people. So from my perspective, this is bigger than one judge and one hearing. This is about something that keeps happening over and over in this country. You got people in positions of power who make decisions based on ideology. First, even the simple fact of go too far to disrespect the position, which is the most powerful position on the law of the land, such as the presidency, over ideology. We see the mainstream liberal media who won't even air the presidential address to the nation when it comes to voter fraud, right? When it comes to how our election integrity is not being upheld. Our voices are being basically undermined in the name of political power. And only those who have rights are those that tell them what they want to hear or vote in the name of their own party for their own self-interest. If you vote my way, then you get what you want. But then they will call our current president the authoritarian or dictator or Hitler. But who is the real Hitler in the name of corruption to stay in power? Right? So ideology can be easily remixed because you've seen the word solid. Oh, well, everyone has rights who are incarcerated, who is in prison. But yeah, but then when you look at your contradictions, it seems like it's rules or rights for these only for those that I support and not rights for those individuals. So now you're ostracizing people. So you only cater to those to your liking, and you oppress and let those suffer who you disagree with or dislike. but there's no standard to begin with because ideology can always be remixed and defined based on how you want to see it. And then you'll say that the facts was presented before you, but then admit that the individual was biologically a male with male genitalia, with male genitals. But then solely absolve yourself from that presented from the facts. So a male genital was never factual. So why mention it? Even though you know why it was mentioned because oh you got questioned. But then you'll say general statements, not really answering the question because ideology only feels as though answers should only be served to what I want to hear, not explained to those who want to question. Get where I'm going with this? So when you look at that, right, and you look at the presidential address when our President Trump made a big announcement when it comes to what has recently come out with Dr. Fauci and the pandemic and the censorship, and it comes out in regards of the voter rolls, right? The whole election, right? The game plan with that and how, you know, there was information within burn bags that were never burned all the way back to the Obama administration. So you have all this corruptness with Iran and things like that. And the mainstream liberal media doesn't want to air it. And they basically are saying that they want to get the facts first and make sure because the president lies. But they have lied on multiple times, pushing fear and fear mongering amongst the American people when it comes to the vaccination. And the whole time, or COVID, and the whole time they were censoring doctors who told them that there were already a remedy for COVID. They just didn't want to hear it because they wanted to push a vaccine. And comes to find out, Dr. Fauci ended up taking Moderna as one of the vaccines that were actually an option and put in his journal from the aftermath he suffered from that he took first initially before he gave it to multiple Americans to die. So when you look at all of that, and you got people in power who makes decisions based on ideology first and themselves interest first and self-enrichment, then try to fit the facts around it afterward. And when they get caught, the response is never accountability. The response is to shut down, move on, change the subject, or block the question. And that's not a judicial philosophy. That's not a political disagreement. That is a cover-up. And you need to understand what that looks like in real life. Because imagine you are in a courtroom. You're there because you're trying to get justice for something that happened to you or someone you love. And the judge on the bench is not looking at the law. The judge is looking at their own personal beliefs about how the world should work and making a ruling based on that. And you'll feel cheated. You'll feel the system wasn't fair. And that's what's happening here. This judge took a serial child predator, a 6'2" man who committed horrific crimes against children, and decided that his desire to be in a women's prison outweighed the safety of every woman in that facility. Not because the law required it, because her ideology told her it was the right thing to do. And when she got called out on it, the response was to block the question. And let's be real for a second. There's a lot of talk in this country about protecting women's spaces. You hear it in sports, as I mentioned. You hear it in bathrooms. You hear it in prisons. And the argument from one side is that we need to be inclusive, that we need to respect everyone's identity. And I get that. I understand that people want to be treated with dignity, but at what point does the safety of women stop being a priority? At what point do we say, hold on, the rights of women in that prison matter too? They have a right not to be housed with a man who has a documented history, or a biological man who has a documented history of violent sexual offenses against children. It's not controversial. That's just common sense. And the fact that a federal judge looked at the situation and said the risk was theoretical tells you everything you need to know about how ideology has replaced judgment in some parts of a judicial system, possibly not all judges. Some judges, maybe some. I'm not speaking for all, but I'm speaking about, and I'm speaking to the majority, not the minority, that there is a possibility, as we can see, because it's not theoretical to the woman who have to share a cell with that person. It's not theoretical to the families who have to worry about their daughters, their sisters, their mothers who are incarcerated. It's very real. And when you call it theoretical, you're telling those women that their safety doesn't matter as much as your political beliefs. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying every judge who makes a controversial ruling is an activist. All right. I gotta say that again, disclaimer. There are plenty of cases where reasonable people can disagree. But when you write it in your own order that the Bureau of Prisons raised legitimate concerns about violence and trauma, and then you say in hearing that the Bureau of Prisons never raised those concerns, that's not a disagreement, that's a contradiction. And when the chair of committee blocks you from having to explain that contradiction, that's not a procedural move, that's a cover up. And that's what my man John Kennedy called it. He said it right there on the floor. You don't want to hear her answer. You don't want her to answer that question very much, he said. It's a cover up of the answer, a cover up afraid of the answer to that question. And he was right, because if the answer was good, you'll let her give it. If the explanation was solid, you'll want it on the record. The only reason to block a question is because you don't want the answer out there, and that's exactly what happened. And this is where the bigger conversation starts to come in, because we talk a lot about trust in institutions. We talk about how people don't believe in the system anymore, and we watch hearings like this and wonder why. When people see a judge contradict their own report and the chair block the follow up, they don't think, oh, that's just politics. They think the system is rigged, and they think it doesn't matter what the facts are because the outcome is already decided. And that's a dangerous place for a country to be, because if people stop believing that the truth matters, the facts matters, that accountability matters, then what's left? You can't have a functioning justice system if people don't trust the people running it. You can't have a functioning government if people believe the hearings are just theater. In moments like this, where a Democrat chair cuts off a Republican senator who's trying to get a straight answer about a judge who put a woman in danger, those moments reinforce every negative thing people already believe about Washington. They see it and say, see, I told you, they're all the same. They protect each other. The fix is in. And that's not good for anybody, not for Democrats, not for Republicans, not for regular people who just want to know that the system works. So at the end of the day, this is about something pretty simple. The judge made a decision. The decision put a woman at risk. The judge's own word contradicted each other. And when the senator asked about it, someone in power tried to shut it down. And that's the story. That's what happened. And you just need to see it for what it is. It's not a left versus right. However, it does come off as a lot of individuals would say this is the far left ideology, which is taking over this country far more than ever, which is turning into the Democratic Socialists of America in the name of communism. And when you look at that, look, that's what a lot of individuals, a lot of Americans would say. And we got to have transparency and accountability in our government, or we're just going to let people hide behind procedure and process when they don't want to answer hard questions. Because once that happens, we decide that blocking the question is acceptable. And then we decided that the truth doesn't matter. And that's a dangerous road to go down. So I'm going to leave it there. On that note, family, as I always say in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 17, the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examine him. And that's what this hearing was about. The judge stated her case. She wrote her order. She made her argument. And it seemed fine. It seemed reasonable until Senator Cruz came and examined her. Until he read her own words back to her. Until she showed the contradiction between what she wrote and what she said. And then it wasn't so clear anymore. That's a lesson for all of us. Always let the other side speak. Always let the questions get asked. Always let the record be examined. Because the truth can stand up to scrutiny. The truth doesn't need the chair to block the follow-up, and the truth doesn't need to hide. And when you see someone trying to block the question, you know there's something they don't want you to find out. So that's wisdom in your own life, in your own decisions, in your own relationships. Let the questions come. Let people examine your words. Let people compare what you said yesterday to what you're saying today. If you're telling the truth, you have nothing to hide. If you're trying to block the question, people are going to notice. So let me ask you, do you think blocking a question in a hearing is a cover-up or just standard procedure? Let me know in the comments. Yes or no. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your post notifications. Spread the peace, love, and positivity. Let the love supersede hate. Peace.